On stage right now for this event, which is, which I've given, I title it myself, I've called it Keep It Short, because in general, in life, that's how I feel about literature. But keep it short, because we're here to listen to and talk about short stories, and specifically Caribbean short stories. I'm not going to step on what Jeremy might say in his introduction, because he's much more of an expert on this than I am. But I think we know that there is an extremely rich and celebrated tradition of short story writing in the Caribbean. We've got all kinds of writing, but we've got some writers who've really excelled at the short form. And that includes the three up on stage. I will let Jeremy introduce everyone. I feel like I hardly need to introduce Jeremy because everyone at Bocas knows him. Jeremy Poynting of People Tree Press, who is the publisher of all three of these poets, who, as I said yesterday, has published more Caribbean writers than anybody. Sorry, my mind is still in the last session. Who is the publisher of all three of these writers, one of whom is also a poet. I wasn't totally off, you know. Jennifer in the middle is also a poet, so she's doing double duty. And I'm very glad to have Keith Jardim, Jennifer Rahim, and Jacob Ross here. But I want you to welcome all of them, but give a special welcome to Jennifer, who is, I think you should all know, is the fiction winner of the 28 OCM Bocas Prize. We are delighted to have her here. We're delighted to have all of them here. And now Jeremy is going to take over.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And I think you're going to have an excellent session here. As Nicholas says, we have three of the very best short story writers who are writing at the minute in the region and anywhere, actually. Let me introduce you. On my extreme right is Keith Jardim, who wrote an excellent collection of short stories called Near Open Water. On my less immediate right, Jennifer Rahim, who's the author of two collections of short stories, Songster and Other Stories, and of course Curfew Chronicles, this year's fiction winner. And then on my near right, Jacob Ross, who tells me he's also written poetry, though I've never seen any of it yet, who wrote Song for Simone quite some time ago, A Way to Catch the Dust, Tell No One About This, where earlier stories and new stories are collected together, which was shortlisted for the prize. And what we're going to try and do this afternoon, they're each going to read, but then we're going to talk, and we're trying to look focused on three perhaps connecting ideas. One of the kinds of instructions that I think is there in the program is the fact, is what is the connection between the short story and the attempt to say something about the body politic, about politics with a small p and the state of the nation and so on. So we're going to explore some of the different ways in which writing can connect, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We're also going to talk a little bit about the short stories as a particular form, and looking at some of the kinds of ways, each of these writers has done different kinds of things with the form, and particularly how the short story can sometimes kind of steal some of the novel's territory by the arrangement of stories, by making connections between stories. So it has the virtues of the kind of focus of the short story on one particular thing, but then can also spread wider. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what the short story and what current practitioners, and we'll probably mention other people as well, have been doing in terms of dipping into the Caribbean roots of short story. I think Jacob said this morning that the Caribbean are all very good at kind of absorbing and writing within a kind of a Western tradition of the story. But there are also other different storytelling traditions. And, each of these people have moved away from the kind of conventional realism of the dominant short story. And, as our third kind of question, we'll explore some of those ways in which that they may have dipped into and made use of various Caribbean traditions of short storytelling. So that's what we're going to try and do. I think you'll have a fascinating session. What we're going to kick off, though, with is a reading from each of them, and we're going to do it alphabetically. So Keith is going to read first, Keith Jardim, and then Jennifer, and then Jacob. So, Keith.
I'm going to read the beginning of the book and the first story, and I'll just stop at the first space break, which is about maybe 7 minutes. It's called In the Atlantic Field. The boy, whose mother is driving, is 9 years old. He looks at strewn rocks on the beaches below, afternoon sheen on watery sand, and the sky, a blue almost uncanny in its purity. Cool wind lashes a car. Earlier, they had passed a village of wooden huts, small shops, homes, and a church on a steep hill overlooking the sea. The boy felt uncomfortable. The church had been built so high. They could smell refuse and the scent of old cooking fires. Little kitchen gardens buffered some of the huts. There were raggedy-looking banana trees, their leaves dried the color of brown paper bags. Half-naked children waved and shouted at them. They saw an old bent woman walking at the side of the road. She seemed 100 years old and plodded along with the patience of a turtle. To the boy, she looked like one, her neck stretched forward horizontally from her humpback as she paused to look at them, drive by, her eyes regarding them as if from another time. A minute later, they passed a man bathing in his underwear at a standpipe on the side of the road. The man hissed at his mother. She ignored him. "Where are we going?" the boy asked. She hesitated, noting the fuel indicator, which registered almost full. "It's all right, just a drive along the north coast, then we'll head back home, and I'll go see Dad." "Oh," he was unsure about it all, and his head hung low until they were beyond the village, heading to the most scenic part of the island. An hour ago, the boy was at home with his mother, and she had been on the telephone to his father. The door to his parents' bedroom had been shut, but he was able to hear his mother's voice. He knew they were quarreling. After half an hour, she came out of the bedroom and suggested they go for a drive. She needed to get out of the house. She had been trapped inside it for days, wandering, waiting. The road, black in the bright light, is undulating. When the car speeds up, his mother's loose skirt with patterns of red flowers billows around her thighs. It's as if the boy and his mother, rising and falling with the car, are flying low along the island's coast. Her wedding ring, a single diamond set in gold, catches the sunlight when she adjusts her skirt or changes gears. They have passed no other cars for 20 minutes and seen no signs of human habitation for longer. "Isn't it beautiful?" she says. "Carib Amerindians used to fish here a long time ago." "I suppose." He looks ahead at the open road, trying to avoid the dance of her skirt, but he wonders what her pale, firm thighs feel like. Their texture and color remind him of the long stretches of beaches they have are passing. He imagines tucking her skirt back and resting his hand on her left leg, which is parted from the other toward him. He blushes at the thought. The wind picks up. "Oh, is that all?" There is a slight edge of irritation in her voice. Her large, beautiful eyes are dark, tired. "It's so clean and bright," he says. He pauses, deciding if she's encouraging him or demanding a response. Then he says, "Smooth like skin, and sometimes I feel like we're flying." He does not look at her legs. She meets his eyes, smiles. "That's nice." The edge to her voice has eased. After the rainy season, there are always these deep colors, except for the arid land here. "We came here last year, didn't we?" "Yes, that's right. Dad was with us. We collected pebbles for the garden, and you wrote about it for English composition. A day by the seaside. Remember?" He frowns and looks away from the road out to sea. His mother sees this and says, "We can stop higher up at the beach, if you like, get some pebbles." She opens her handbag and takes out a packet of cigarettes and silver lighter. She rests them on her lap. The car rises near the edge of a cliff. The rocks are dark along the beaches. Watery luster surrounds them, and white caps flash on the sea. On the horizon, the outline of another island is just visible. A vulture glides across the view, gains altitude in the breeze, then heads inland. The road continues, rising and falling, heading, it seems, to somewhere far away in the sky. There's a gas station up ahead with a phone, if I remember. I'm going to call Dad. He hits the door with his knee. What's the matter? You and Dad are arguing again. No, I just need to chat with him. Irritation has returned to her voice. That's all. It's an argument. Nonsense. I have to let him know we'll be a little late coming home. It's not safe to be out here for so long. He'll worry. They descend to where the road is almost level with the sea. The breeze, gusty here, brings a strong scent of salt into the car. His hair ruffles. She asks, how's Troy? He's gone away for the weekend with his parents and sister. Well, Monday's a public holiday. You'll get to see him then. Maybe Dad will take you both to a movie. I don't think Dad will want to, he says, with the finality of tone he has learned from his father. Her shoulders and angular face slump as if the fatigue from her eyes has spread there. They slow down, approaching the gas station. The road goes on, hilly scrubland on one side, stretching to the low brown hills, and on the other, lifting above the sea and heading toward the sky. The gas station office is a white block-shaped building, its roof extending to shade 2 pumps. His mother parks so the pumps are between the car and the office. The interior of the office is visible when their eyes adjust to the shade. There is a single garage attached to the office in which a tall man with long rope-like hair is spraying water beneath an elevated car. Water blows out into the sunlight, creating rainbows. In the office, another man with short hair sits at a desk, rolling a pencil in the fingers of his right hand. He stares indifferently at the boy and his mother. Before switching off the car, his mother looks around, making minimal eye contact with the 2 men. She gets out, and the boy can hear the water in the garage, even smell its oily, sun-rich vapors. The men pay her no attention. They seem aware that she wants only to use the telephone. They look bored, tired. His mother says, I'll be about 10 minutes. Wait here. She shuts her door. He's not listening, not even seeing her. He's watching the man in the office who continues playing with the pencil. She's already walking to the telephone booth, which is near the garage. The boy watches her now. The man in the garage watches her too. As she approaches the telephone booth, the sea breeze blows her skirt up, showing the full length of the back of her legs and above, upper thighs pale and smooth, the texture and color of a beach scene from high above the earth. Her underwear, black and narrow between her buttocks, flashes in the sunlight before her arm, long and slender, sweeps around and catches her skirt. The boy sees the man in the garage grin and shake his head. Then he looks at the other man in the office and sees the pencil freeze in his hand. His mother enters the telephone booth and lights a cigarette, dials a number. Now and then she half turns and pulls on a cigarette, revealing hollows in her cheeks. She holds the smoke in a moment, exhales forcefully, her head angling upwards, her eyes closing. After several minutes, she opens the door of the booth and drops the cigarette. She steps on it and shuts herself back in. Her left arm folded across her chest, she repeatedly opens and closes the hinge top of the cigarette lighter with her thumb. There is a battered no smoking sign near the exit of the gas station. The boy sees it for the first time, sees the road going away from everything around him, and remembers his mother's promise about the pebbles. He glances at her and leaves the car, begins walking toward the beach. It is behind the office and down the hill. He passes white containers of ice, sees the man in the office smile and wave. The boy waves back. He likes the heat, breeze, and ice cream advertisements painted on the office wall. Here the shadows are lengthening. The texture of sea and land is changing, promising the softer, deeper colors of late afternoon. The lower half of the wall, under the advertisements, is smeared in grease and oil. At the end of the wall, a pipe is dripping, its puddle of water, earthy fresh in the salty air. He sees the 2 blues of horizon, sky and sea, meeting in a perfect crease where one changes into the other, and he walks on, his eyes wide open and bright. At the top of a hill, bristly with grass, he takes off his slippers, leaves them there, and goes down to the beach. And that's it.
Okay, nice to be here. I'm going to read, and if I'm a little long, you can cut me short, please. So I'm reading from Storm. The character is Scholar, Woodford Square philosopher, who is a little touched. So it seems fine to me. Thanks. So that's his story. Part of it anyway. When the promenade saw the secretary throw Scholar from the focus like a bag of rubbish, it was sure that was the cause of the storm. It lashed Port of Spain hard, then spread out to every corner of the island, even Tobago. Met Office officials in Piarco didn't know what to say. None of their instruments could explain. They hadn't seen it coming. No logic could account for the rains that doused the island like a cleansing. But the promenade witnessed the exact moment when the first raindrop struck the pavement. It had a front seat view on the happening. Scholar. They had no reason to treat the man like a criminal. No right to disrespect the fellow, madman or not. So the complaint went. Tongue was vexed. Poor Amber. She was at her station in the reception hall when Scholar came through the door. Up to that point, the day had passed without incident. In between the usual watching and waiting, she had found time to jot a few lines in her notebook. The job demanded little of her. To compensate, she would stave off the feeling that she was marking time. The piece that came in struts that day dragged on, looked promising. A good addition to the collection she was forever putting together. Calvin called them her dear Marian poetries, told her they wouldn't pay her bills. He always claimed to be joking. She pretended indifference. Just so, with only minutes to closing, the day took a turn for the worse. Scholar entered the building, a piece of cardboard pressed to his chest, and asked to see the editor forthwith. She was in for a challenge and didn't want to mess up. Whatever the drawbacks, working security at the Focus was a convenient detail. Nice environment, close to home, newspapers to read when things slow, plenty time for her jottings, the city right outside the door. She could take lunchtime walks in search of inspiration. But now, here was this madman looking like he wanted to cause trouble. Scholar had dressed for the anticipated meeting. He was decked in his Sunday best, an oversized gray jacket in need of laundering, trousers secured with a length of electrical cord, and a used-to-be white shirt finished with a black necktie. The Focus, he felt, had no rival as a carrier of his letter to the nation. Smithy had given the paper character and depth. His track record was incomparable. He had been committed to the people's business. He had bequeathed a legacy, a path to follow. Amber sized up the situation. What to do? Her training came back like rote. Rules of engagement. At all times, communicate respect and strength. Sir, you have an appointment? Appointment? I don't need no appointment, miss. My colleague was the late Mr. She didn't wait for him to finish. Mr. Who? Look, you can't see anybody now. We're closing just now. So please leave the premises. She waited. She wanted to send him packing before Cummings and Randolph returned from their rounds. Young lady, you do not understand. I have an urgent letter. He drew attention to the piece of cardboard. This, he said, must go to press. The nation needs the benefit of my opinion. The man had gone too far, full of himself. There was a word for that. Arrogance. Narcissism. She toyed with the possibilities. Miss, my insight into the current crisis pushy, impelled. Yes, that was it. Rising abruptly, one of the power moves she had learned in the training course, and feeling for the baton on the side of her hips that Calvin called substantial, Amber went into action, deliberately exaggerating her intonation. "Sir, like you don't understand English. You cannot see the editor just so. We have procedures to follow." She sat down again, keeping eye contact. "Make an appointment, come back tomorrow." Scholar engaged her with a blank stare. Amber lifted the ledger to seal her point. "Look, see this book? When you get an appointment, upstairs will give you the okay to let you in. Now, Mr. Gentleman, leave the building." "Leave? Miss, whom am I offending? The matter would be settled with one call to the editor. You could let him know I was a colleague of the late Mr. Sir," she spat out the word. An eruption was brewing. It was time to step up the game. The rule for taking control. Never show your opponent weakness. But her mind went blank. Never show weakness. By the time Amber had caught herself, Scholar had thrown his arms into the air, and with his eyes raised to heaven, he shouted, "You would never allow this atrocity to take place, Smitty. No respect for people. I have an opinion to share, a point of view." The man was really mad. What to do? She really did not know. Cummings and Randolph came from nowhere. In unison, they shoved the troublemaker towards the exit, locked the door. Cummings barked. The whole place stopped to take in the scene. In a daze, Amber saw the sad pantomime from behind the safety of the building's glass facade. Cummings stood like a wall in front of Scholar, who sat with his knees drawn to his chest. He carried on a muted rant, oblivious to the fate of his precious letter now trampled upon. Then he started to rock side to side, as if he was a boat and the sea was rough. Cummings launched into what looked like a serious tongue lashing. Scholar clasped his ears. As if that wasn't enough, he stretched out like he was on his own bed, kicking his feet, beating his arms, and bawling like some bad spirit was riding him. The commotion went on until Cummings put God out his thoughts and slapped Scholar. Thunder. That was how the sound ricocheted all over Port of Spain. Spectators looked to heaven and then to the question fixed on their neighbors' faces. One or two had the presence of mind to protest. "Security, you're advantaging the man." Cummings relented, but the slap, those who saw agreed, caused the colossal piece of bad mind that rooted Scholar to the spot. No matter how they tried, the man could not be moved. Like a complaint that demanded a hearing, he wasn't going anywhere. Scholar, after all, wasn't a small man. Realizing that water more than flour, Cummings conceded they needed backup. He called headquarters. One man was available. There were only 3 of them. A 4th man was needed, each to take hold of a limb. Someone from the crowd would have to do. That was when Cummings caught sight of Raga, standing tall among the curious spectators, holding a black bottle in his hand. He looked the part. With the 4 men working together, Scholar was hoisted from the pavement, his body spread eagle and suspended in midair like an enormous spider. Moving him to the waiting van was easy enough. But once inside, a fresh bout of protest began. Once again, flat on his back, he heaved and gasped like a drowning man, straining his neck upwards and filling his mouth over and over again with air until his cheeks looked like they wanted to burst. An unexpected calm fell. When they thought he had simmered down, Scholar started to blow. "Ha! Ah! Aho, ah, hi, I, o, ao, e, I, oo, who, ooh, until it seemed he had exhausted every vowel and combination he could make, releasing into the air a constellation of sounds, but not a single word. Not words, but the pain of their soundings, like a woman in labor pushing out her newborn into the waiting world. The bewildered guards and mesmerized crowd felt a great push forward, through and down, drawn up on the inhale and let down on the exhale, lungful after lungful of raw, unstructured sound, unformed words wanting to be heard. That was what amazed and frightened them, the realization that they each heard whatever unvoiced need they carried through their days. So when Cummings, as if shaking himself free from some powerful spell, shouted to the driver, "Take him straight to St. Anne's," nobody disagreed. He had brought them much too close to the threatening eye from which they could see themselves. As soon as the driver mashed gas and the van got on the way, the talk went that a heavy cloud gathered over town, then wind and rain, like when a water bag break. Oh, thank you.
Good afternoon. What I'm going to read is taken from this book. Tell no one about this. No. It's a lie. It's not so it happened. The trouble didn't start with Ambo and the bull. The trouble started with y'all. Long before Ridley boy child Nimrod came back from St. Andrews and see what happened to his father. He tell you all that he walked the 20 miles to the prison on Edmund Hill. He say he climbed the high stone wall, hung on to one of them iron poles that anchored the barbed wire fence on top of it, and watch a man walking his father to a post that buried in the ground. He talk about the cloth that they put over his father's face. He say he hear his father cussing and protesting when the hangman hand reach out and drop the rope around his neck. And then Nimrod stopped talking. He was looking up at your all face and gulping like a fish. And all the words that Ridley boy child know leave him just so. Words left him for good. And to this day, that same expression stay on Nimrod's face. No way you all could forget that. And if it's forget, you all forget for true. It's time you all remember. A bright, wet morning it was. The night before it had a full moon, a blood-running moon, because it read no ass, like a person eyed at bus. And people almost stifling from the smoke coming down from them burning charcoal pit on the hills up there. Miss Evie was the one who talked to Nimrod. True, she was a tight-faced old machete of a woman. She was short and hard like a wood knot. But that morning she showed she had a soft heart, even if the softness gave birth to terrible words. She stooped down in front of little Nimrod, hold his face in her hands, and she looked straight in the eye. "Your father gone," she said. "He not coming back. Forget you ever know him. Because remembering will spoil your life. Remembering go and blight you. Make yourself forget your father." She shake him hard, like if she want to empty his head of all them things he just don't see. Nimrod's body was flopping soft and loose in Miss Evie's hands, as if he got no bones. Then Miss Evie cleared she throat, wiped she eye, and went back to washing. Looking at the boy, standing there amongst all you, he didn't have a person here who didn't know that the child in Nimrod was dead. It got killed by what he see. And the thing that replaced it was so strange and frightening, it follow you all to your bed and take over all your dreaming. It wake you all up next morning in a sweat because it didn't make no sense how, stupid so, Ridley dead, how a man could be so tall walking and alive one minute and swinging from a rope the next. Funny how y'all fellas didn't want to talk, or don't want to talk about Ridley, and your women refuse to forget him. You see, women around here quick to recognize a scarce thing when they see it. They realize straight away that the world not full of man like Ridley. He tall, he easygoing, he got beautiful roving eyes and a smile that come generous and quick. Y'all women used to love to watch him walk with the promise of good loving in every shape of his hips and shoulders. Right, Ridley was the kind of fella that made God-fearing Christian women sin themselves just looking at him step. You fellas couldn't figure him out. He never picked no argument with nobody, and he always with his boy child. They laugh a lot, they hold hands when they're walking. Sunday evenings, when they're coming back from catching crayfish up the river, every woman raise her head and drop what she's doing just to watch Ridley strolling home in the middle of the road with Nimrod curled fast asleep in his arms. And you all know, the sight of a fella murdering his son so shameless and tender is a wonderful thing to women in this part and a fucking embarrassment to y'all. It happened before, and it's going to happen again, that a beautiful man who finds himself amongst other men is a provocation. It's a big insult to the ordinariness of y'all self. Even if that fella arrive, holding the hand of his one boy child, build his house with his own two hands, and never pass a glance at all them women who throw sweet eye at him while they're going about their business. Leastways, Ridley ignore them in the daytime for sure, since a person can't vouch for what might happen nighttime. But like old people say, if you didn't see it happen, then it never happened. If everybody live according to that one commandment, they're never going to have no problem in life. But no, not Ambo. Everybody know that Ridley neighbor Ambo never liked him. School children used to say that Ambo so damn ugly. Even ugliness embarrassed them associated with him. According to them children, he forward take up most of his face, and God planted the eye too near his temple. But you know school children, they see somebody they don't like, and they multiply everything they notice by 10. To make a long story shorter, Ambo see the way Ridley draw the warmth out of his woman, how the sight of him makes she drop she voice soft. He heard the fuss she make over Nimrod, and couldn't stand the brazenness and she laughed whenever Ridley passed by. Make it sufficient to remind all you that 11 months later, Ambo woman make baby, and Ambo see the color of the infant not his. He said the shape of the baby foot not his either, and the hair too soft to belong to him. It's after all that come to pass that we can talk about Ambo and the boat. I'll stop here.
Okay, now, if you can pick up your microphones and get ready. Yeah, but start by saying that, I obviously know all three books very intimately, and they're all kind of books which at some kind of level have a political center to them, in different kinds of ways. You can make the point that you can approach the politics, the state of the nation in very kind of direct kinds of ways. Thinking of something like Rhoda's, who's sitting there, her book, who does it in direct ways and takes some small incident and we see the nation through it. Sometimes it's done through more metaphorical kinds of ways. So it's recognizing, isn't it, that you can write in a sort of political way with a small p in lots of different kinds of directions. Metaphor, allegory, being sort of taking incidents and using those incidents as kinds of significant ways into bigger kinds of scenes. So maybe perhaps we can start off by saying a little bit about how you see your work in relationship to that kind of sense of the political, the state of the country and so on. Do you want to kick off, Keith?
All right.
Speak closer.
Yeah. I don't... when I'm writing fiction, I try not to, and I usually don't think about politics with a capital P. But I know it's there, and I know it's going to come up, and I know, and I don't like to lay it out. I prefer to put it there, let it come up indirectly or between the lines, so to speak. It's there. I mean,
I mean, the story you just read today, the kind of unease that's there in the story, that the unease that focuses around the woman in the story, that's on the edge of the thing, that has that kind of power in it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's there. I just think human beings are trouble, so you write about them and you hope something interesting or clear will come out of it, and not necessarily something good or moral or you can't get away from politics. I don't really like to talk about it much when it comes to my fiction, frankly. But it's there. You can't get away from it.
Okay, perhaps Jennifer, yours is almost doing things from the opposite direction. I mean, in the very kind of way the book is named and things, there is a direct confrontation with a particular political moment, the curfew and so on. But the stories themselves, in a sense, begin in the way that often we think of the short stories beginning. They begin with particular characters. Would you like to say a little bit about how you work through characters into that sense of making some kind of commentary on the state of the nation?
I mean, it's always, is this on? Right. It's always difficult to sort of talk about what you have written, because sometimes when you're writing, the thing presents itself, and you basically follow where it would like to go. So it's not like I have a plan, I'm going to write about X, Y, Z, because this is a political issue I need to deal with, either at the level of government or at the level of human relations, Curfew Chronicles, for me, was just one of those texts that happened to have kicked off in the midst of this so-called war on crime, that perhaps it was a legitimate war on crime. I'm not judging it. I'm just that was the impetus. And I found that in beginning to think about what was going on in the country in 2011 at that time, I was primarily interested in what people were living, not so much what the official, issue was with the state or the government, but basically how people were trying to negotiate that period. And a lot of interesting things happened, in terms of where that material came from. A lot of it, not a lot, well, not all of it, but some of it came from literally stories that would appear in the newspaper about what happened to people because of some police raid or some, agitation. I mean, I chose to read a scholar's story because just recently we had this awful thing of a man being killed outside KFC. Apparently he's a little mental, and the security guard stabbed him. So, it's like issues so macabre, but happening to people that ordinarily would not, of course, be, in the front line. I would say that if I am being political at all, it's because I'm interested in how people are trying to negotiate the state.
Yeah, I think my response is very similar to Jennifer's, although I write quite intentionally, politically. My writing can be quite, I think, confrontational in some contexts, and that came from an experience I had when I was in secondary school. I remember very clearly, I was in sixth form, and there were students, there was a program that this guy called Paul Roberts, who interestingly enough ran for in the last election, but he was a broadcaster, and he decided that he would be clever and have a program where a radio program on a national radio where secondary school students would, read stories and, student news and all that kind of stuff. And that was in the time of Gary. Gary was, the only people who didn't know Gary was a dictator were those who were not living in Grenada at the time. But this is a guy where, at the time in Grenada, to be young, intelligent, articulate, it's almost like a death sentence. If you're not careful, you would get disappeared, okay? So imagine me now being the one in the school that they all saw as the one who, who could write, as we say. And I wrote a story that is replicated in this book, and it's called A Game of Marbles. And it's set in the context of a curfew, interestingly enough, where the island was shut down for 3 months. No ships coming in with food or whatever it is, no ships going out, no planes coming in. The Union struck. Grenada was literally crippled for 3 straight months, and we had to find food. So we used to go up in the hills and dig wild yams. I tell you, man, many of us survived on fruits. So I wrote a story. As a young boy, I was, doing my A-levels. I wrote this story exactly as Jennifer described it, just describing that experience of trying to find a food. And it's about a little boy who goes to a man's house, who was a politician, and he raid the man's house. He shoot up the man's turkey and take one. All right? Well, the thing is, and I wrote that, and it was read on the radio. So imagine the Monday following that, because it was read on a Saturday, very popular program, by the way. Monday morning, I'm going to school, I'm walking to school, and I see my headmaster, Mr. H.D., but he's standing on the top of the hill, right? And just pacing up and down. And as soon as I got him, I said, sorry, you're late. He just said, young man, come. And he said, go home, and don't come back to the school until I tell you to come back. Because what happened was that Gary sent up his soldiers up in the school looking for me, for this boy who wrote this story. And I went home, didn't tell my mom anything because, she's a bit tight-tempered in those contexts. And I just said to myself, oh, so that is what I can do with words, And I wrote more. And since then, it's really got me going, It's even brought me here, sitting with these wonderful people, So yes, I have no problems about writing politically. And I have to say one final thing is this, that I suspect it is an inherited lie, an inherited myth. I suspect it's our very comfortable middle classes who control education and everybody's, who have tried to create a distinction or dichotomy between politics and life. So a book is judged as being not very good if it's political bullshit, right? If I can go on. You can look at Dickens all the way up to John Steinbeck. These guys were intensely political in their writing. So I make no apologies for describing people's lives in a political way. And in the Caribbean, we cannot dissociate one from the other because politics is life. Think about Jamaica in the 1970s and 80s. Think about Grenada now and elsewhere. If you can get killed for your political views, right? The price of sugar and the corned beef or whatever, or rice or whatever you eat, is determined by people who run you, right, or run the country. So that I have no issues with that at all, and I don't apologize for being overtly, covertly, or whatever it is political, because politics is life. I can't dissociate one from the other.
And I just make the point in that particular story that Jacob refers to. On the surface, it's a story about a group of boys playing marbles. It's a story about a boy who's a dead shot with a catapult, who hits the turkey, who puts out the lights in this man's house. But when you know that the boy is a black boy who is struggling for food, and the man in the house is a very light brown Grenadian who is in part of the power system, it then becomes an intensely political story. And it doesn't say politics on the surface, on the tin, but it has that powerful kind of resonance inside. Okay, let's move on to perhaps the second area we want to talk about, which is this kind of like the specific kind of qualities of the short story as a form. which lets you do that kind of thing. And one of the things that perhaps we'd like to explore a little bit is that in each of the short story then, its beauty is, that it can appear in the magazine, it can appear in the newspaper. It's complete and of itself. It's there. It doesn't need to have any companions to it. But yet, one of the kind of things that one notices that, it's not that new. Sherwood Anderson was doing it years ago in terms of, what's his collection called? I can remember now.
I don't remember.
Weinsberg, Ohio, that's the one. So it's been done for a long time. But the idea that the short story collection, by putting one story next to another story and becomes something more than a simple collection of stories. That the stories speak to each other. And one of the things, I'd like to get each of the people here to talk a little bit about is how they've kind of worked with the fact that collections can have an architecture, that they do different kinds of things. Keith's, perhaps you say, is more about a tone of voice, isn't it? Although you have characters who are like a narrator who is a boy, somebody who is a younger man, so on and so on, they share a kind of way of looking at things. You have a sense that this is a collection which has perhaps you talk a little bit about how you find that voice. Jacob's book has a distinct, it's divided into parts. It has different names. The stories are arranged, in terms of different kinds of ways of, sort of looking at things. Jennifer's has, although each of the stories is sort of complete in itself, it has an architecture. It has that pattern of working through the 24 hours and characters kind of bumping into each other so maybe perhaps in turn you could say a little bit about how you think about the collection as a collection rather than just the individual stories. Keith?
Well, that's a good question. Arranging it was a brutal task at times, but when you were able to see how they might all fit together, it was kind of exciting. And one of the things that helped me were cell phones, because in the beginning of the book there are no iPhones or cell phones, and then when the book ends, you have those instruments. So people paying close attention will know the history, the time period roughly, and that the stories are set in the Caribbean, not necessarily Trinidad. All the stories are not Trinidad. There's one set in Guyana, 2 or 3 in a disguised Antigua, that sort of thing. So, and then yes, the young male character, the boy. I wanted different ages of that, and you have to have a certain variety, and you have to have them play off of each other, and each story, as you said, can and should be able to stand by itself, and then you put them together, and it becomes something different, and it's kind of magical that way. I think maybe poetry does that. Poetry collections do that as well. I'm not sure if the novel can do that. Maybe it's an inferior form. I don't know.
So, I think, the male character is not the same male character through the things, but you have a sense that he shares as he grows older.
Yes, I think you could point at some of the stories and say, "Oh, that's him again,"
Yes.
at a different point in his life. Yes, that's there. Yeah.
Jacob, do you want to say something about your sense of that?
Yes. My initial project, when I began to write, when I began to think in terms of a collection of short stories, was that I would do a riverine collection, meaning a collection of short stories that present the Grenada that most people don't know or aren't aware of. It's the world of the river, like when I was growing up, of leaves and shadow and light and all that stuff that I thought we were going to lose, and in fact we have lost now. So I kind of had that idea, and for the second book of short stories, because this is a collection of these short stories plus some modern ones, I wanted to make it have the sea as a very dominant and very strong presence. Because, as I said, I have always been mystified about the kind of ignoring almost of this ever-present reality, except for in the writings of people like the poets do it a lot. They excavate the sea as an image, as a symbol, Walcott and that lot, and so on. But I don't see as much of it as I expected to see in the writing coming from the Caribbean. So I thought I would do a collection of short stories that was about the sea, and that was a way to catch the dust. You know, very strong presence of the sea in these narratives. And then the second one, and the third one that I was attempting to write before you came with this brilliant idea about pulling them all together. And believe me, I did suggest to you that you do collected stories, you know you're getting older. Yeah. And I was getting, anyway, and that was meant to be London stories about us in London, the Caribbean presence in London. So conceptually, yes, there were clusters, or they clustered around the ideas that I had. With this book, it didn't work out that way. We went for something slightly, a bit different, but quite metaphoric and quite beautiful. And it wasn't my idea. Again, it was this man here. He's made me, by the way, or he's making me. No, yeah. So we had darkness, we had dust, and we had something else. The last one.
Oceans we had.
Oceans. But what I discovered, to my surprise, in looking through these stories and revisiting old ones, is my preoccupation with Caribbean women, not Caribbean men, but Caribbean women. I write a lot from the heads of young girls, women, mothers. I have a thing about women and writing women, and I know where it came from. I make no apologies for it. And women readers tend to actually be struck by that. In fact, if I called myself by another name, they would assume that I was female, some of them. And that's to do with my mother, how I saw her bring up 11 of us, 3 sets of twins, blah, 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 all that stuff, and empathizing with, I know you're all thinking about, in them days was normal, by the way. Yeah, 3 sets of twins, and to prove that she could make singles, she gave us a few singles, okay? And she's alive, kicking, cussing, 88 years old, going strong. I asked her how she did it once, and she boxed me. That was young. Anyway.
So if you know that Jacob has a twin called Esau, there is another story to be written there, I'm telling you.
And he does feel I stole his birthright. He really, really resents the fact that, anyway, that I'm here talking to you and he's out there doing some other stuff, building bridges.
Jennifer, do you want to say something about how you work through that, managing the way of turning a whole number of individual stories into a complicated structure?
Well, I think, Jeremy, that the theme, the issue, the curfew with 9 to 5 restriction had me thinking about time, you know? And the way in which I think as Caribbean people, we have a particular relationship to time historically. It wasn't ours. You know, other people controlled how we use time, and who could control time were those who were in control. So it had me thinking about this in the context of a post-independence situation where you have a curfew that could not be really rationalized well from my perspective. And therefore, what was our relationship between this official control of time and what other people were doing with time? You know, people were, mostly the characters are trying to work out some of their personal issues in the context of this official control. So I think the time for me became a kind of subject, you know, and particularly while there's a lot of movement in the text, inner time is very important, you know. So people might be driving from one end of the island to the other, but what they're working out, how they're bearing time, the burden of their own time, was primarily what fascinated me about them as characters that came to me or interested me. And you know, so I think so the material really shaped the architecture. And I think as I think more of the fact that I myself was not sure if I was writing a novel or link stories at one point, it's, as I think about it now, I think this concern about the fluidity, the fluid nature of the story into the novel or whatever, for me becomes a kind of reflection of where we are as a nation. You know, I think trying to write a novel of development, for instance, or trying to write a novel of nation in a context where we are now shifting, you know, we are no longer fighting for independence. We have independence, and now we are talking about what does that mean to be independent? What does it mean to be constitutionally a democracy? Is now sort of, to me, causing a shift in terms of how the imagination will deal with this so-called whole idea of a nation. And these individual characters with their own stories, and somehow in the space of the Caribbean, the geography as we, you know, has, to me, it is really a geography that forces us to deal with the fact that we are connected in the context of almost every kind of historical moment, good or bad. So I think the linked architecture is not something that, for instance, I say I favor, or even that I favor the short story. I think the material favored it. And when I saw the conversation that the characters were having with each other, I realized, listen, you know, this is what the text is becoming. It's becoming this conversation with these people's lives, various lives that are trying to work out their own histories in relationship to this, this official control of time. So that's how I ended up with.
And I think there's also, I mean, you were absolutely right about the kind of about time, but there's also a kind of, there are parallels of place, aren't there? So things can be happening in different parts of Port of Spain that radically reveal the kinds of lives that people are living. Yeah. So it's whether it's Nelson Street or St. Clair or something like that.
You know, I mean, I don't want to, you know, to read, you read the book and you find it, but to give away the book. But I think, I mean, I'm really struggling artistically, aesthetically, really, with how we occupy geography, you know, in this particular historical moment. You know, I think Jacob mentioned that in terms of how he remembered Grenada and what Grenada is now. I think geography is like, I would believe, place, which is a kind of, you know, is geography. Places occupies us today more than anything else. How do we feel in the context of our place? And I think having to deal with how Nelson Street emerged in the context of the curfew in relation to the other coasts had me thinking about, you know, this ownership of landscape. Is it an ownership? It's not a possession, but it's also in a way kind of out of our control. You know, there are places that you can't go to. So we have this hotspot thing, you know, this hotspot phenomena. And I think we have to now begin to think about this question of being in this place in relationship to very much at the bottom of all of these stories is the presence of violence, you know, of crime, and how do we take ownership of such an environment, or how do we reclaim it, or have we ever claimed it, you know? Yeah. So these were some of the questions.
Well, what really struck me about your book, Jennifer, is, in fact, I asked myself the question, would this book have worked if it was structured as a conventional novel? And the answer in my head was no. And what I think is striking about your book, Curfew Chronicles, is that so much is said in such a small book. And largely because it benefits from the multiplicity of points of view. So that something happens, almost a kind of electricity that happens between the characters, or my knowledge of where each, because the reader is the one who has the overview, not the author. So you read it and you know, okay, I met this character here before, he or she was doing that. Later on you make very interesting connections, and you see certain kinds of tropes running through, like fish, for example, was one I picked up. And it actually had me thinking a lot for a long time. In other words, it seems to me that there's a quality to the short story And your book, the structure of your book is a particular kind of structure. Naipaul tried it with Miguel Street, for example, or did it. John Steinbeck with Tortilla Flats. You know, it's not. It's very, very interesting as a structure. It's what I call a novel of convergence. Everything converges on one major event or place. In the case of Naipaul, it was place, Miguel Street. In your book, it's an event, which is the curfew. And that is a very powerful thing to have hit upon and to actually exploit it as well as you did, you know, so, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Jacob. But the thing that, I mean, one thing I'm a little obsessed with what happened in one's book, but it really strikes you after the fact, you know,
Yeah.
not so much when you're doing it. But you said something there that had me thinking. Of course, I was aware of Miguel Street, but you had the one boy narrator. And I was thinking, I'm dealing with this curfew. Everybody's affected from whatever class, whatever part of the island, you know. And, you know, Lovelace came back to me a lot. You know, you need a voice. You need voices. So they are very much, and I was dealing with narrative voices. I was practicing myself. I'm dealing with a kind of omniscient presence, like when I'm talking about Mavis and the minister's wife, I'm very, you know. And then you have this voice of place, you know, that is really not mine, you know. When I'm reading it, I know it's not mine. But it's the voice of the place in the, well, it is mine because I'm in the place. But it's that sort of weird thing where you feel that there is a narrator above the storyteller. And I think there's a storyteller above the writer, actually, and I'm just following the storyteller. So I think this question of how one gets in contact with, and necessarily so, based on the kind of society we are, with all these various types of voices, has been part of the enjoyment I think I got from writing this book, finding those voices, you know, and allowing them to speak.
Just one come back, because I mean, one of the things that's particularly in your book is a sense of the treachery of place.
Yeah, that's there, and I think also the beauty of the place, as this young lady in a review put it that way, Shivani. So it's a lot of things, and place is very important to me. Physical place, extremely important.
Let's go on, Jacob. You wanted to?
I wanted to have it's a question in a way for you, Keith, which is that, I mean, I was really struck, I told you this, I was really struck by your stories. I loved the frankness of it. I love the absence of a certain kind of shyness, which I get from some Caribbean writers who are afraid, they almost as though if I write about this, I'll be judged. Your first story, for example, I was very interested in the gaze of the young boy at his mother. It's a sexual gaze, obviously, I think. That's what I pick up. It's a sexual gaze. And he's actually getting at a point where, you know, he's beginning to kind of feel, you know, that side of it. So that there's a kind of mild transgression in there, especially when you think about Caribbean readership. There's certain things, you know, if you write it, you know, you kind of wonder, boy, Jesus Christ, are they going to shoot me when I get there or stone me to death, kind of thing. And I was wondering really, well, if you had any kind of reticence about it. Did you hesitate about any elements in the writing, you know, such as the one I just referred to, or did you just feel to hell with it and just go for it, as I do?
No, I didn't hesitate. I'm not sure I know how to answer that. I didn't hesitate, but why didn't I hesitate? I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't really know. I don't care what people think, really.
Okay, let me put the last question, and then we'll throw it open, because I'm sure there are questions that'd like to come up. I mean, as an editor, one of the things that I notice very much about what is beginning to come into our submissions pile and things is a kind of an interest in what I would call the sort of Caribbean Gothic, something which has both deep Caribbean roots in terms of often making use of the kind of whole lore of folk tales of Lagahoo and so on, but putting them in an utterly kind of modern context, but also something that connects into the idea of the Gothic as something that emerged particularly in the kind of 18th century, where as a kind of romantic response to the idea of enlightenment and rationalism, there's this idea that there are always energies and unconscious urges which are underneath. Would you like to sort of comment? I mean, there's that, and there's also, perhaps more than just a fashion, a kind of a return to looking at what we'll call marvelous realism. And I think in all the novels, all the stories you've written, there are elements of, Keith has that in one of his stories, of a kind of gothicness about it. Jennifer has elements in her stories where they depart from realism. You do. So do you want to just comment briefly on how sometimes realism seems too constricting?
It is, but it's, I think it can be marvelous as well by just paying the right kind of attention to it. And if you pay in particular the right kind of attention to a particular character, for instance, in my book, Cynthia, who's the white people maid, it's there very much, this gothic, fantastic sort of world that people inhabit that resides in the human imagination. But even if you look as clinically as you want at the world, at least I find, it never ceases to be marvelous.
Right. Yeah. Jennifer?
Well, Jeremy, that's a hard question. First of all, I'm always resisting these, this tagging on these tags to Caribbean, so Caribbean post-colonial, Caribbean Gothic, one gets a little nervous, because I think we're doing something, we've been doing something that's particularly here, it's particularly coming out of our engagement with reality, with super reality, or whatever you want to call it, with alternative realities. For me, I felt, because I was dealing with, literally that theme of violence was very much in my mind. I felt, as the author, I needed to lift out of that reality. I didn't want to write just a book that was totally faced by this dark presence of crime, the murderer, the gunman. To me, that's Gothic, if you want to put it that way. So I felt that to find, a bit of the marvelous, a bit of suspension of belief, Scholar bringing down the storm, that's very, very, very much a kind of organic kind of idea, when human beings are disturbed, the whole world is disturbed, or vice versa. Yeah. So the injustice brings down the storm. You have this fish that doesn't die. I wanted to find ways in which the imagination can find avenues for life, and I didn't want to make an apology for that to follow. I needed to find doors out of this dark period, and I think the marvelous provided me with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Jacob?
Yeah. I like Gothic. I'm a sucker for Gothic. Because I grew up, as many of us have, in a culture where the Gothic narrative is deeply embedded in our psyche. The way women used to control their men, and certainly controlled young fellas, boys, is by giving us the story of the La Jablesse. The La Jablesse is meant to be this very seductive woman with very long hair, who stands up at the cross with a long dress that covers her foot. And assume, and you're coming from the rum shop and you're drunk, or you're coming from going and, gallivanting out there in the night, and so on, and you just see this woman standing there, and then she calls you by your name. You never met her before. And she has this absolutely amazing seductive voice, and she just says, follow me, and you following the shifting hips. And, she get to a point where you're on a precipice, you just know your date. And then suddenly she turns to face you, and you see a raised foot, but it's not a foot, it's a hoof. And she kick your ass down at the precipice and break your neck. And you growing up as a child, as a young fella, hearing that, When nighttime comes, you want to stay home. You understand? So, and there are a whole range of narratives. I can spend all evening telling you a whole heap of them, Lugaroo, sucking your blood and them kind of things. So, and that was about control, and it was also about instruction. Anansi. I mean, we've done all kinds of stuff with Anansi and a lot of nonsense with Anansi, let's face it too. But Anansi is a serious thing. This spider, imagine yourself in a situation where, you are the small person, you are the spider. You're controlled by a system that is designed, as Walter Rodney said, to kill, okay? A system that literally destroyed 25 million lives. That's where you are. And there are people who are talking to you about, and you have lion. We don't have lion in the Caribbean, but a lion is a blonde thing with, blonde eyes. A lion looks Caucasian. Yeah? Yeah? And it's a powerful beast. So, and you have a little spider, having to survive the lion and the white of lion by the use of that. And that is your grandmother or your great-mother saying to you, you can't fight the system physically, use your damn brain. That is Gothic too, in a way. It has, at the heart of that. And my contention is, ladies and gentlemen, is that perhaps you should look less at other people's mythologies and so on, and look at ours in order to construct a literature that would be just as powerful and effective as Octavia Butler has done with her speculative fiction. We don't need, I would love to see a science fiction coming out of the Caribbean that doesn't include jet engines and laser beams, There's a mode of flight, the Lugaroo knew it, that we can, and I think that, but that's what I'm getting at. And I think that we have I've always said this, we have underexploited the vernacular of the Caribbean short story, right? And we have become extremely fluent and conversant with Western narrative, and I am guilty of that as much as anybody else. That story I read you a while ago is a very Caribbean story. It's recursive, there's a way, and you responded to it interestingly. And it doesn't sound odd to you because you know it, yeah? And there are features on the structure to that story, and if I had to read the whole thing to you, that is so Caribbean. It doesn't have any of the narrative forms or modes of Western story that I've been digging. For example, you start with the ending, usually, and you have little lessons in between, as you go along, okay? And there is always an assumed audience, all y'all. There are so many elements within it that, and I'm experimenting, and I think it works, I think, because you all responded to it, I know it works. But even if you didn't, I still know it works.
Okay, let's throw it open. I'm sure there's some questions. Oh, over here first, I think. Can you shout? Yes.
Jennifer mentioned something that I find fascinating, which is the observer. So she became like the observer, observing herself as the writer in the story. And my question to the three of you is, have you, because I notice you all were in agreement, but have you consciously allowed for perhaps a story or an entire book for that observer observing you to write the story? I mean, I know it's fiction and this is what imagination is all about, but
Talk about Miss
Mr.
Stanislas.
The answer is yes or no. But I have the last novel I wrote, the Bone Readers. Some of you may have read it, right? No, Miss Stanislas, that character that people write about, and in fact, sometimes I get frustrated because the dominant character is a fella called Digger, but everybody talk about Miss Stanislas. But this is a woman who literally popped into my narrative dressed in a yellow dress with sunflowers on it, a church hat, yeah, and so on. And I followed that. That character literally took me through the book, and to the extent where my children, and certainly my partner at the time, thought I was getting crazy because I would just laugh out loud when Miss Stanislas cracked a joke. She had a manner of speaking. So sometimes, yeah, you do get, it's really amazing what this is what an Australian writer calls, I don't remember his name, he calls the alpha self. There's something that, exactly as Jennifer is saying, something that literally possesses you in the writing, and the characters inhabit you, and they really inhabit you. That's for me. And certainly, Miss Stanislas was an excellent example of that, where a character literally, and I had to pull her back sometimes, politely. Yeah? Yeah.
Because she'd have given you hell.
Yeah, she would have given me hell because she had that attitude and so. So yes, for me, it has happened. Yeah, within the narrative itself.
Anybody else on that one?
I mean, for me, I know that various characters or various situations demand a particular kind of voice. And I must say we have to be grateful to Earl Lovelace in trying to understand what might be the aesthetics of a place that informs how we tell stories and narrate stories. Because, the literature would tell you this thing of the chanterelle's voice, or the storyteller's voice. It's real, There is a voice of place that you have to give room to. I have to sidestep what I might think is my particular kind of Jennifer Rahim voice to allow another voice to speak. Literally, I have to say, nah, this is not this person, this is not even this situation. I think that's when the work, for me, becomes real. It doesn't become like a manipulation of situations and stories. It becomes the idea, the reality of a place and the people there with their stories to tell, and I am just very much a mediator, and I think that's the challenging thing. I think you brought that up when you were speaking to Keith, about not holding back on what a narrator wants to say or what a character wants to say, not being afraid of being judged. I think one piece. So I definitely think I was nervous about Caribbean Gothic. Not that we don't know what the Gothic is, the experience, but there must be a language that we can use. I mean, the Caribbean is not just an isolated place. We know it's a relationship with the world. That's who we are. I mean, what is Caribbean is a very complex mix of things. I'm not saying that. But I believe when we come up with these notions that we are now writing this Gothic, and all of the examples that Jacob brought up are from our folklore, and we are tagging on this concept that is very much not a Western sort of concept. I always wonder, is that really what it is? We have people struggling with notions of the Calypso novel. I'm not saying you go there. I'm just saying that I'm not sure those hyphenized types of concepts are really true to what we are doing and have been doing for at least these years, right? Trying to find this aesthetic. That can't be one thing, obviously, because that will be putting things in a box, but that we need not be utilizing these tags for, and that's my only concern. What is the language for it? I mean, I don't want to imagine it, but I'm thinking there is a voice of, there are voices that come from this place and who we are. And I think writers have to sort of bow to them, give them room.
Okay, there was another question, I think, over here in the middle on this side.
It's part of who we are. It's part of developed, such as Edgar Mitchell, a best-selling author in the Caribbean. He wrote Gothic, and we have a tradition that goes back a long way, and that we've not availed ourselves of. Thankfully, it's not keeping us from having a future. I'm part of that wave, and we are thinking deeply about where we want to go, who we were, what that means for what we want to do, and where we're going to end up in the future. And some of the better-known names are people like Nilo Hopkinson, who was born in Jamaica, but also lived in Guyana and Trinidad, and has been a panelist here. Tobias Buckle, who was born in Grenada, and lived most of his early life on a boat before moving to the US. Myself, RSA Garcia, I have many, many young people that I'm corresponding with online, because due to the fact that we're dealing with people who have come up in this age, a lot of the presence is in social media and online, and it's young and it's just coming up, but we have short stories out there that manage to talk and have a voice and reflect on who we are without being tied down necessarily to the idea of what came before. We revere it, we honor it, but we also want to think about what we can do with who we are now. There's no reason to think that we are done. We are done developing, that there's one voice, one kind of Caribbean voice that is the right voice or the proper voice.
Oh, okay, I think I'm getting signals from the door. Perhaps one very brief question. It has to be a proper question. Yeah.
It was for, right. It was for Jennifer. I was wondering whether or not you would consider writing another set of chronicles, given that I know you said you didn't want to go into the Gothic, but seeing that some voices have been silenced, would you take it within some voices have been silenced? Would you therefore consider writing another, even if it's a type of sequel to this one? Or is it that you've done with that, you've done it?
Okay. I think we're out of time, but I would just say, it's not that I'm against the Gothic, I'm just wondering about jumping very quickly into these kinds of rubrics, and it's maybe a quibble about language, but but language is so important. But I was saying I wouldn't want to go back to curfew. I think I'm working on something else now. But thanks for the question.
Okay, I think unfortunately we're getting our time up signals. So can I ask you to give a big round of applause to our three writers? And I'm sure you think, as well as hearing their stories, you'll agree that they're extremely instructive about the whole art of the short story. So another round of applause for them. And thank you very much.